Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You were joining your partner, you were joining your host Greg Thompson,
I'm joining my partner.
and my life partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. I was so focused on you that I said your part.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. I had a terrible day. We were talking about it offline. I'm
And
super
me too.
annoyed. I'm
That
irritable.
yeah. My goofed
Yeah.
up intro fits my day. I had a horrible day.
Yeah, but I'm excited for this show. Last
Yeah.
week, I had ranted about how I hated talking about the offensive line. I really don't know all that much about offensive line. Not that I know the world about running backs, but I feel more comfortable talking about running backs. And I think I've been thinking about this all day long. I stopped and talked to my mailman about it. I don't even know what I'm going to say. This is a really hard room right now to get a read on. So I'm happy more to talk through it with you than necessarily come through and give anybody any crazy hot takes today.
Yeah, and I think, I think there's some definitive tiers that we're going to talk about here, and I think
Right.
people have kind of mixed those a little bit more than what's realistic. But the sense of nobody really knows in those tiers who's 1 and 2, who's 3 and 4, and how are they going to play, and depending on who's 3 or 4, do they play a role on game day? There's going to be some fun stuff to get into. But
Right.
before we dive into those, make sure you're checking out our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. They have an awesome setup for you. If you download their app and use the promo code Cover1, you get $25 free in play. You're able to check them out. Have a really good time. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I actually tested a couple out. If you're interested in that kind of thing, check out the Cover One Fantasy Show. We're having a lot of fun with that, and we're going to be doing some live ones on there, and you'll be able to go head to head against me, Aaron, and all the rest of the guys having a lot of fun with it. I know Anthony Romeo from the Hoofs into it. Anthony Prohaska from Disguise Coverage is having a good time with it. And there's going to be some cool stuff that even if the fantasy end of it isn't your thing, they have some player prop parlays that are really cool where you can go in and decide, is a guy going to be over under his yards, and you pick out 3 of them and you can win 6 times your money. So a lot of fun things that way. So we'll have a lot of fun with it, let you know about it. But tonight is the running back show. And as we get into our position previews, we've talked in length at all kinds of different positions. And the offensive line we talked about last week are obviously a huge part of it. Eric and Anthony did an awesome breakdown, being able to kind of talk about the impact of last year's scheme, and that, we don't know, was it a pivot based on talent or strategy that they went more zone heavy than the pin and pull and the power scheme we saw the year before? And is that just the trend and direction they're going this year, or will a more active in-person mini camps, OTAs, full training camp, preseason games, is that going to let us know which direction they go? And I think it's going to be an indicator for us of what they truly prefer, and whether last year was strategic or simply lesser of evils in the time they had.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because historically, right, coming into this table, that was what we were excited about bringing him in and utilizing a guy like Mitch Morse when they got him, is that pin and pull and some of that gap stuff. So I'm not sure why they transitioned more to the zone. Zach Moss has those abilities to be a zone running back a little bit better, and we saw better production when they started switching to zone with him. So part of being a good coach in this league is utilizing the talent that you have and not necessarily getting stuck. We've seen coordinators here in Buffalo get stuck in their view. Rex Ryan was a big problem for him, being stuck in his scheme so much, and the talent didn't fit it and being unwilling to change. So maybe Brian Daboll's changing to the scheme. We were talking about this a little bit offline here. The Bills' offensive line and how they've built it, while it was impressive, I remember being on this show with you and being like, there's no way they're going to retool an entire offensive line in a single offseason. They were able to do it, super impressive, but how they've sort of patched it together in the run game specifically feels a little odd. It feels like there's some pieces that don't necessarily play that great together, right? We know Mitch Morse. We want to see him out pulling, getting him in space. But Feliciano and last year Brian Winters, and now Cody Ford, and maybe Forrest Lamp, who knows, or Ike Bochter. These guys aren't super athletic guys, that we haven't seen them be able to have a ton of success in schemes like that. The tackles aren't great run blockers. So a lot of this is going to be, I think, dependent on how that line comes together, like you said, with the whole offseason all the time. We saw OTAs already. Has that made a difference? So I'm excited. This is one of the things I'm most excited to see when camp opens up and we start to see preseason games. What are they working on? And that's a reason to follow Cover One, because what Eric's going to do is he's going to take every little breakdown video from the Bills that they put out, and he'll be like, oh, see this blocking scheme. They're running. They're going to go back to zone. So reason to follow Cover One, you're going to get the first dibs on exactly what the direction this is going. But you're right, it's going to have a huge impact on who's getting the touches and where the production's going.
Well, and it's not even as much on the scheme as you touched on it before, just the talent. That there are pieces of this that we want to be able to go towards, hey, who are our best talent? Well, our best talent are the outside and the center. Same we talked about in the offensive line, and that Darrell Williams, Deion Dawkins, Mitch Morse are better pass blockers than run blockers. Deion's pretty good in both. Sure. And then, like you talked about, Morse can get out in space. Williams really can't. And that both Ford and Feliciano are better run blockers than pass blockers, but they're better mauling power run blockers. Right. So do they have to pick a side? Is there a way to intersperse those and to do them, all together? I just don't know if there's one dedicated path, but I do think we're going to know. I'm excited to see it in camp. I'm excited to see it in the preseason games. I'm excited to see it in the scrimmage. I think from what I read, they're announcing the 3 available training camp practices tomorrow to fans, and tickets will be available at 10 a.m. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, tickets are available. There's going to be 3 practices. I might try to go to all 3 of them just so I can see the offensive line moving around and see what we can do with it. But we've talked about the scheme. We've talked about the offensive line. Let's get into the guys on the team here.
Well, real quick, though, I want to touch on, just before we get going here, Jason says, let the run game improve. And that's kind of where we're all at, right? We want to see it improve. But I urge, if you haven't, go back and watch that video that you referenced earlier with Eric Turner and Anthony Prohauska talking about the run game problems. And it really was frustrating. They talked about it a number of times, how frustrating it was to watch last year, because run game, there's so much intricacy in the run game. We talk about it being, everybody doing their 1 of 11. And in the run game, it might be even more significant that everybody's doing their 1 of 11, because there were so many runs that were close. And the difference between a 2 and a 5-yard run on a drive makes all the difference in the world. And you saw a lot of that where it was just one person making a small mistake, not even a huge mistake, a small mistake, a misread here, not getting leverage there. And it really had impact on the production. So we all want to see it improve, but these fixes that are needed to get, nobody wants to see the Bills be the number 1 rushing team in the NFL, right? We want to see still a pass-heavy team that's moving the ball, but we want to see more production out of the run game. And I don't think they're far off. I think you go back and look at a lot of those plays, and it's cleaning up a thing or two here and there. And if they can do that with some sustained consistency, I think that they can have a nice, productive run that we're not freaking out about at the end of the year next year. And that isn't their Achilles heel on offense.
Yeah, and we talked about this throughout the season. We've talked about it throughout the offseason. No one is looking for them to run more. We want them to run more efficiently and better when they choose to run. And
I want them to run more because we're blowing teams.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Out. Exactly. We want, to have those games where, oh my gosh, I can't believe. Drive. Yeah, we had all these carries at the end because we're just smoking teams. But you have to have a specific scheme and a strategy that allows you to be effective and to hit more impactful runs when you do run the ball. We need to break off more of those 10 and 15-yard runs to keep teams honest, because the offense is still going to be good. The passing game is going to be good. They're still going to pass 70+% of the time. It's just the reality of what they built and the talent they have, but you need to be able to put it together to go that direction.
And to the passing point, we need more production in that out of the running backs as well, which we could talk about.
Yes, yeah, and getting playing time is going to be based on doing more than just what you do when you run the ball. We're going to talk about that when we get to roster spots. There's an awful lot of people who are very quick to cut special teams contributors because, anybody can do that. Keep the guy who can run the ball. It's not always that simple.
Right.
So as we talk about that, there are 6 running backs currently on the roster. We will talk about them in different phases of
All of them?
things. Yeah, we're going to say the names of all
Okay.
6 of them. So oddly, the most expensive is our special teams gunner, Tywan Jones, at 1.6 million. We also have Devin Singletary, obviously. Zach Moss, both of them are just over $1 million on their rookie contracts. Matt Breida was signed to close to a minimum deal, just over that. Then Christian Wade is still on the roster from a practice squad standpoint, and Antonio Williams, who obviously showed himself well in the second half of that Week 17 game last year, is there. The 6 of them combine for $6 million, which is the 26th ranked running back group in the NFL. So they're at least, when you're going to be 70+% passing, you don't want to spend a lot of money on the running game. They're at least doing that end of it well. We'll talk a little bit more about what areas we'd like people to step up, but at least they're not spending a ton of money and not having production in the running game. So there's at least some solace that it's at least efficient roster construction from a spending standpoint. Although
Yeah, I mean,
you wouldn't mind having somebody that earned their money a little bit more.
Totally. Yeah. I think this is sort of a case study in a way about this argument that we sort of have every year of where do teams value the running back position, whether it's in the draft or free agency, right? And a lot of people, and I'm not saying that this is the wrong idea, say just draft any running back between the 3rd and 5th round and they'll eventually pan out. Well, the Bills have done that twice. And they have that contract control, which is nice. You mentioned that this is not an expensive room, and they're getting some production out of this room. But really, one of these guys has to develop for that sort of philosophy, at least here in Buffalo with this team, to show that is a true philosophy, that you just draft these guys 3rd through 5th rounds, and that they're gonna, you're gonna hit on one of these guys and you'll get a lot of production out of them. The Bills have this set up perfectly for those people that pound the table for that. And so it's an interesting case study in that. Is that going to be the direction forward? And we know, I still believe in some of the rumors that the Bills were in on running backs in round 1. We know that they were in on Le'Veon Bell late in the season. So they're not scared to make an investment there if this isn't panning out. So this is a big year for these backs. But yeah, that control, if either Singletary or Moss can really be a consistent proven back, then Brandon Beane looks like a genius.
Yeah. So let's start tonight with the top.
A genius again.
Yeah, more of a genius, even in another area. Let's start with the top tier. We'll get to some of the other guys, but there's definitively a top 2.
I've been waiting to talk about Christian Wade all day. Oh,
obviously we're talking Christian Wade versus Tywan Jones.
Right.
No, it's Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Devin Singletary is going into his 3rd year, has had multiple very nice productive seasons, 2 years at 950 yards from scrimmage. That's not nothing. As many have talked about, there was a stretch there where Zach Moss started to take the slightly larger role. It wasn't a primary and a backup, but he started to be more of the 60 and the 60-40, and he was having a stretch there where he was starting to really take a more prominent role. Now, it did come in a stretch where the Bills were winning 8 straight games and blowing some teams out, and some of that was inflated by some, 4-minute offense, milking the clock at the end. But he looked like the better back in some of those stretches as well. I am a little surprised. I think that stretch and him getting hurt when he did and the assumption of what he was going to do the rest of the playoffs has turned into kind of a drumbeat that he is definitively the number 1 guy. And that obviously a comment that Joe Buscaglia made in his article with The Athletic got picked up by some fantasy football aggregators that are out there that report news, where he said he could see Zach Moss getting up to 70% of the touches and being the starting running back and Singletary as a backup. And I'm not going to dismiss that as no chance. I don't think it's nearly that clear cut, and I think there's still a pretty decent chance that Devin Singletary has the larger share of this offensive workload. And maybe it's 55-45 or, in that area, but I don't think it's a done deal that Moss is going to take the bigger role.
Yeah, I don't think today they know who is going to take that role on. And I don't think there's a running back 1 right now in this building, in this scheme. I don't think they see it that way. When Sean McDermott, they ask him every year who's going to be running back 1, and he keeps saying, that's not what we're doing. And I think some games you'll see a bigger workload from Moss than Singletary, and that's okay. I predicted last year that by the end of the year that Moss was going to be the leading rusher and have the most touchdowns from that running back field. I'm still high on Moss. He started a little slow. He did progressively get better. You saw the improvement throughout his rookie year, and that is what got me excited. I'm not as excited as some that are now guaranteeing that he's going to get the bulk of the touches, but I do think, to start the year, it will probably still be a pretty even split while they're continuing to figure out who's going to be that guy that they go to. And when I say the guy that they go to is when they need production. Who is the guy that they bring in? Because I think they're going to rotate these guys. I think we're going to see plenty of each of them. And so, yeah, I can't see a 70-30 split.
I'll be surprised.
Anyone. I would be very surprised. And if it is, then you got to try to trade Singletary next year if you're only using them 30. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a good use of that asset. And like you said, Singletary's been a productive back, and he can do some things that Moss can. He's better in certain situations. So I don't see it. You can keep him off the field that much.
I looked up a couple things that, obviously we give crap to our friends over at PFF all the time, so I'm not going to reference any grades, but we do like their premium stats, and they do have some nice stats out there of what they did. And here's a couple that were surprising to me as I prepped for this, where I think a lot of people think that Moss had the more productive season. They were pretty similar in yards per carry and production. It was far different in the receiving game, where obviously Moss had 18 targets and 14 catches. Singletary had 50 targets and 38 catches. So it was a definitive difference in the pass receiving mode. But a couple other areas that I think people would assume Moss was the leader in. If you look at yards per carry after contact, Singletary was better at 3.17, and Moss had 2.86. Missed tackles forced. Singletary had 38 to 22, and that's, in 19 games to 14 games. So it's not like he had double the games, but he had almost double the missed tackles forced. And the same thing in 10-plus yard runs. He had 23 of them. Moss had 12. So I think that there's some valid support for exactly what you said, that he started to take over a bigger role. We saw the touches. We saw them lean on him in some of those game modes. I don't know that he was the better running back last year. I think that you can make the case that Singletary was as good as him. And I think there were some metrics where he had some positive elements and more breakaway runs, more longer runs, things like that I think there's some possibility that, I'm not going to assume that those pictures of him looking all, muscled up and things like that. As I think Marcel Louis-Jacques put it, if you walk through NFL locker rooms, that's what pro football players look like. He didn't look special. That's what all of them look like. They are ridiculous athletes. They're supposed to look like that.
Yeah,
but
and if you just
some of the
worked
speed
out,
comments are interesting.
Yes, and if you just worked out, you are always going to look extra. Yeah, that's how muscles work. I hate it every year. We do this. We see pictures. I've done it. I did it
Best
with
shape of his life.
John Miller 2 years ago.
He looked yoked.
He looked like he could throw anybody out of the club, and then it didn't translate to anything. So that doesn't do it for me. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot of folks in the fan base that are just writing Singletary off as he's no good. The Bills need to kind of move along from him. He's nothing but a backup.
He's going to be the game day inactive and to sit on game day.
Yeah, no, I don't believe that. He's proven to be a productive NFL running back. His rookie year, he was one of the most explosive. He had some of the most explosive plays in the league, and that matters because if you're not running the ball a lot, you need to gain some explosives out of your run game every once in a while to keep that toxic differential up. You want to get those explosive plays. And that's one of the reasons they brought a guy we'll talk about soon, Matt Breida, in to see if they can generate some explosive plays from this running back room. I don't know if Moss is that guy. I think he has some potential to do what Singletary does with those explosive plays. He just hadn't necessarily progressed, I don't think, to that point as a rookie. So we'll see if he can do it. But Singletary can provide that type of production for you. So, yeah, I think he's very much going to be part of this game plan. He's very much going to be part of the passing game. It's just a matter of, I think when you're in the goal line situation, you're going to lean on Moss. When you're in a
4-minute
3rd and 2 type situation, we're going to pass it to Beasley. But if they don't do that, we're going to run it to Moss. 4-minute situation. So that's where I think there's not going to be a running back one, but there's going to be a priority back for important situations. And I do think Zach Moss is built to be that guy in this backfield.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at it that I think some people assume they have very similar roles, and they're not completely different. They're not as different as Matt Breida is, but they bring some different things to the table. There's some wiggle and some vision that Singletary has that Moss doesn't have. There's some power that Moss has that Singletary doesn't have.
They both have really nice balance.
But they do have short area quickness. They do have good contact balance. They both have solid vision. I think Singletary is a little bit better, but again, the explosiveness is a little bit stronger with Moss, so there's some balance in both directions.
Right.
When you look at that next tier, and let's start with Matt Breida. Matt Breida, is coming in. He's 26. He is a player that I loved when he was in San Francisco. He had 2 stretches where he had the fastest timed mile per hour time on the NFL football field in 2 different seasons. When he gets up to top speed, he is flying. So he ran a 4.39 at his pro day out of Georgia Southern. And sometimes that happens. You don't really know if it's going to translate. His translates. It translates on the field. He is crazy fast. Now, he's not a great running back, because obviously if he was really good and that fast, he wouldn't have signed for the minimum, and he would have done something in Miami last year. So obviously, I think the people who say, oh, he's going to become the primary ball carrier and take over this backfield, there's no evidence he's capable of doing that. He had one small stretch in San Francisco. Other than that, he's always been a contributor in a group and committee backfield. Now, it's interesting to see that in some of the areas like, breakaway yards and breakaway run percentage, he's double the guys on the Bills team. He's not little. He's still like 5'10", 200 pounds, so he's not a small guy. But his explosiveness, his acceleration, his ability to get to top speed is excellent. His vision's not great, and that he needs to have a lane. That's why the awesome Kyle Shanahan, that outside toss where he could just get to full speed and turn the corner. He didn't have to have awesome vision. He knew he was just trying to beat you to the corner. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see where it plays in. But I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm going to cheat and play both sides of the coin. I don't know for sure that he makes the roster, but if he does, it's going to be because they have a plan for him and he's going to contribute. I think he still has a little bit of work to do to lock up a roster spot.
He's not a lock. I'm higher on him, I think, being on the roster. I think he's a guy that Brian Daboll manufactures touches for every game. And it's going to get hard. I haven't broken down my roster projections yet this year, and I know those numbers are going to get tough for who they're going to be able to keep and who's going to be able to be a game day active, and we can talk about some of that a little bit later. But I see this guy and what he brings that no one else in that room brings, and I just keep saying to myself, like, it's similar to, it doesn't have to be Isaiah McKenzie, but that gadget role, whether it's McKenzie or it's somebody that you can manufacture some touches, again, to try to sneak out a couple explosive plays. And we know Brian Daboll has a little bit of that gambler in him, that he wants to, take a gamble on a play that he thinks can create an explosive play. And Breida's that kind of guy. When you get the ball in his hands, he can do some special stuff. And it doesn't have to be a lot. I don't think he's going to come in and take away a ton of carries. He's not going to come take 10 carries away from Singletary and Moss a game. But if you can manufacture 4 touches for him in a game and try, and hopefully one of those breaks for a 20-yard gain, like that's worth keeping him on the roster. I know it sounds silly, but if you can break an explosive every game or every once in a while, like that's a reason to keep this guy. I think he has that special ability. We'll see this summer. I agree with you though. Like, I think people are seeing the highlights, and his highlights are as high as they are. Awesome. Like, they're beautiful. I remember I agree with you. The first time I saw him, I was like, how does San Francisco always get these just dynamic, super fast backs? Like, these guys just fly. And he was one of them. And I was terrified of him in Miami. Shanahan figured out how to get some production out of him, but it doesn't seem like anyone's really been able to fully unlock this guy as a real NFL running back. And maybe it's possible. Maybe the people on Twitter know something I don't. And maybe Brian Daboll can unlock that, and this guy can be a huge gem. That'd be fantastic. But I think it's more of a gadget player, offensive player that he can manufacture some touches for. And you brought up off air that, and maybe he can be a kick returner. Maybe he can contribute special teams in that way and really solidify a game day spot.
So the couple folks that, like Dawn saying that she thinks that Breida's a lock. I think the area he can lock in that roster spot is by adding one more piece, and that one more piece can be kick return. That one more piece can be maybe pushing Isaiah McKenzie for the gadget role, that you can put him in the slot and run him on jet sweeps. He's faster.
Does he
than
run
Isaiah
routes
McKenzie.
though? I haven't watched enough of his. I haven't seen him run routes.
I agree. I have not gone through to spend the time looking at it. He certainly had plenty of
screens,
targets and
targets.
pass. I think the vast majority of it was targets. That would be interesting to see how much of that. He had over 100 targets in his couple years with San Francisco, so there was plenty of that. I don't know how much of that was lining up outside of the backfield to do it.
Right.
But the one concern for me is last year's Dolphins team, and that he was by far the most talented guy in that backfield, but the backfield was led by Salvin Ahmed and Myles Gaskin, and those are not special athletes. They're not. He is a significantly better athlete than both of those guys, and he couldn't beat them out for more touches. He had double-digit carries in one game, but he was active almost the whole season. It was – I'm not – now, I heard some things.
I love Chan, but I don't.
I heard some things about, he was signed with a decent amount of money and supposed to be, something there, and then it didn't work out. And I don't know if he soured or if Brian Flores soured on them, but I heard there was maybe a little bit of miscontent in the usage, but it still was interesting to see how they went through it. And for him to have 5 attempts a game, it just... I was a little surprised it wasn't more than that. So that's my little grain of salt in that. Was it just the Shanahan run game that made him look so fantastic, and he was just able to use his world-class speed? Because he has world-class speed. That's real.
Yeah. Right.
But now I also think more highly of Brian Daboll than I do of that age Chan Gailey. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get a little bit more out of him, and that it was just that Miami was kind of a dumpster fire last year.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really sticky when you're looking at stats and analytics without that context of who's this guy, what teams are they playing for, what schemes are they in, what were they asked to do. Some guys have careers like this where they have traits that just jump off the charts, and people struggle to figure out how to unlock that. And I think some of what happened in Miami is they had weapons on offense. That offense wasn't very good. Even when they were having their stretch, it wasn't like a game-breaking offense. And I think that the game a little bit passed Chan Gailey by. I know he was good here, and he got a lot out of guys like C.J. Spiller. And for Bills offenses during the drought, Chan Gailey was a breath of fresh air. But I think the game, even then, was kind of starting to pass Chan Gailey by a little bit. And I don't know that it got any better. And from the guys that we talked to over at Dolphins Talk during the season, I followed them on Twitter. They couldn't wait for Chan Gailey to go. And part of it was the inability really to get anything out of that run game and have any type of consistency with it. So it's hard to knock the player necessarily in that situation. But now he's got a chance. I do think that Brandon Beane brought him here. We talked about that home run hitter in the press conference. We know they were looking for it. I think he brought him here to have a real shot to be part of this running back room. Now can Brian Daboll and Bobby Johnson in the offensive line help him unlock that? That's going to be a big question here this summer. And Singletary and Moss have some time to continue to develop. Breida, I agree that he's not necessarily a lock, and his window to make this team is short. Like, he's got a short window here this training camp to put some impressive days together to where they can say, hey, we need to manufacture this guy touches, and he needs to be a part of this team. Because we'll talk about these other guys. There's guys that can be that kind of fallback running back 3. There's guys that are really good special teams contributors that can deserve a spot on this team if he's not that guy. So it's a short window for Breida here this summer to prove to the Bills that he needs to be a part of this team.
Yeah, and John and many others have shared the same sentiment as John, so this is not certainly just him. I think off camera before we started, I had said I think it's probably 80-20, and we'll talk about the 20% here in a moment. Matt Breida is not a lock because no one that gets a minimum contract and a $40,000 signing bonus is a lock.
Yeah, it's the same way like Isaiah McKenzie's not a lock.
Yeah, like it's just they did not give him an amount of money that is a lock, and that I agree it's likely that he makes this team. He's just like a TJ Yeldon was in previous years. It's likely that he makes this team. It is not a guarantee that he makes
Numbers
this team.
are going to get
not
tricky.
a lock. There are other positions. There are other players who are maybe more talented at their position that might get cut than having to debate on, hey, our third and our fourth running back here. So there are some difficult choices coming up. So right now I do think it's likely that Matt Breida makes the roster, and I even put it at 80%, but I don't think it's an absolute lock. And one of the reasons why is our man Antonio Williams. Antonio Williams was the most transacted player on the Buffalo Bills roster last year. He got released and re-signed and released and re-signed and released and re-signed.
It was like every other week.
Yeah, it was 6 at one point. I went back and counted. I will say the fact that he went undrafted and then didn't get claimed 6 different times by other teams that could have claimed him to their practice squad, we need to pump the brakes a little bit on what kind of talent we have here.
Trademark.
Now, I will say you can get yourself a Pump the Brakes t-shirt on cover1.net. The second half against the Dolphins last year was encouraging. He ran really well. It was 12 carries for 63 yards, 2 touchdowns, breaking tackles, making guys look disinterested in tackling him. That's true. The challenge is when you're getting blown out by 3 scores and losing 56-13 in the 17th game of the year when you've been eliminated from the playoffs and it's the second half and your bags are already packed and your mind is already in the Bahamas, sometimes you're not an active tackler. We don't know how much of that was one or the other. We don't know how much of that was Antonio Williams is a big, powerful running back fighting for his NFL life, and how much was the Dolphins players kind of checked out and not tackling that hard. I'm not going to dismiss it and say that he has no value and that was a complete mirage. I just think we need to pump the brakes a little bit in that we don't know how much of that was Antonio Williams and how much of that was the disinterest of the Dolphins.
Yeah, and either way, NFL executives aren't making any decisions based on that context that you said.
They see him in practice. They see all the other pieces.
Absolutely. And I think he showed enough that he's worthy of staying on this roster and not being a guy that's cut every other week, and that he can be a practice squad guy here after the summer wraps up. I think that there's some development there that he could be a decent NFL running back over time. He's still got some development to do. He's not there yet. This guy's become Duke Williams on Twitter. Let's be honest. Like, Duke Williams has started to fade. There's still some Duke Williams lovers out there, but it started to fade. This is the new Duke Williams, and I think he's a practice squad player. There's not a whole lot more for me to say. I'd like to keep him, develop him, see if he can be a running back if one of Singletary or Moss doesn't work out, but it's not this year.
Yeah, and I said 20%. He's got a real chance to make this roster. He's got a better chance to make this roster than other good players like a Jake Kumaro, or heck, maybe better than a Darryl Johnson. But there's going to be good guys, maybe a Tyrell Adams or Markel Lee gets released, or Tyrell Dodson. There's going to be good players that don't make this team, and Antonio Williams might be one of them. And if he's our, rotational RB4 who could be on the practice squad, and if somebody gets hurt, he can come up. He seems to be an NFL caliber running back, and that's nice to have. But I just think that certainly in my mentions today, when we were getting ready for the show, there were some people telling me that Antonio Williams was going to take over the lead role in this backfield. And, if you talk about playing style and ability, Zach Moss is better at everything Antonio Williams does from a power back standpoint. Like he's better at all those things.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. And that's the thing. Like, I don't know. We have to have some perspective here. It really is. I keep saying it's Duke Williams all over again. This guy needs development. He's younger than Duke Williams, so at least there's that. We can keep him and develop him, and that there's some potential that he can be a better running back. But I don't know. We'll see this summer. Maybe he shows enough. But I agree with you. I think it's maybe even less than 20%, maybe like a 10 to 15% chance that he finds a way onto this roster. I think that he's probably released this summer and gets brought back on the practice squad. I don't think teams are going to be clamoring. Running backs are league wide. There's a lot of these guys that are kind of hovering around this ability where they can come in and make some plays, but you don't really have a spot for him. He's kind of right there. and I think that's just where he is. I bet if you found those fans that are telling you that he's gonna be this gem all of a sudden, they were saying the same thing about Duke Williams. They're calling for Jake Krumer to get more touches. Like there's just a section of the fan base that loves the undrafted guy, and I get it. It's a fun story. It's an underdog story. You want these guys to succeed, but in reality, I think those three guys that we already talked about, there's just too much talent there to take off the field for an Antonio Williams
Correct.
to get any reps.
And say again, not picking on Richard, I think that I understand the point he's going towards. I think people need to separate Taiwan Jones from the running back group. Taiwan Jones is not a running back. Taiwan Jones is not part of the equation of, hey, we keep X amount of running backs. Taiwan Jones is part of the equation of, hey, we keep X amount of special teams players. We talked about it in the linebacker show with Tyler Medikevich. We talked about it in the secondary show with Saran Neal. We talked about it in the defensive line show with Daryl Johnson. Those guys are, they're not that good at the defensive position, for one. We'll talk about it next week when we reference Shea Kumro in the wide receiver show. Taiwan Jones is a special teams player. He does not factor in to Antonio Williams. If Antonio Williams were to take Taiwan Jones' roster spot, it would be because he showed he could be an NFL caliber gunner, not anything to do with his running back role. Now, that's where it comes down to. I think it's one or the other of Matt Breida or Antonio Williams, and I even had thrown out the idea, it gets a little crazy, the year before, not last year with the COVID, whatever the heck they called Jake Fromm,
right,
the distance quarterback. They obviously showed previously that you can keep your quarterback 3 on the practice squad because they're never going to be game day active, so it doesn't really matter if they're on the regular roster or the practice squad. Last year, TJ Yeldon never dressed unless one of the other running backs were hurt. They dressed 2 running backs every game and then Taiwan Jones. If you're going to do that, couldn't you just keep Antonio Williams on the practice squad as your RB3 and bring him up when you need him? And and then, hey, that's an extra Forrest Lamp, or that's an extra Tyrell Adams, or that's an extra, Rashad Wild.
You're not selling me on it by telling me Forrest Lamps. It's
an extra person at a deep position where maybe you could get by with 3 running backs, but one of them's Taiwan Jones, and you actually only have Singletary and Moss on the active roster. Now, again, that's very unlikely. That's probably a 2% chance, and it's 79% Breida and 19% Antonio Williams and 2% that neither of them. But I think there's a chance they could try something like that.
But if a Lamp comes out of nowhere and has some resurgence of what they thought he could be when he's drafted, or Obata, maybe Obata plays to a level where we talked about that with the defensive line. Like, how do you
10 defensive linemen?
Yeah, you're going to shake out a good player that isn't going to be able to come back to your practice squad on that offensive line. Yeah.
It's way easier to put running backs on the practice squad than it is offense or defensive line. Linemen are harder to get onto the practice squad.
Absolutely. And like I said, I haven't dug deep into my roster projections yet. I got plenty of time. I want to take a look at camp. I'm not into them prior to getting my eyes on these guys. But what I do know going into it is that there's going to be a lot of hard decisions. There's going to be a lot of numbers playing. And these conversations aren't crazy that if somebody can't, are we going to move on from Taiwan Jones? How many special teams aces are you going to give up productive running back spots for, or productive whatever spot to keep one of these guys? They've got a number of those guys now. So how much say in this room does Heath Farwell have after pounding the table for Saran Neal, pounding the table, and they're going to let him keep Taiwan Jones too? It's going to be some interesting conversations coming up here, but I'm not sure how much Antonio Williams plays into that, other than being more of a pawn than his skill set. I think the pawn is that we have a young guy that we maybe can develop, and we're not worried about him being on a practice squad or getting a roster. Like, we can just kind of keep him floating around this building as a break in case of emergency thing. But it's not because he's awesome and they're trying to find a way to keep him on the team.
Yeah, and again, we're not saying he's not NFL roster caliber. He obviously
I like him
to be.
Yeah.
He's right there on that fringe and worth keeping in that role. But it would be because, and I think the way that Richard phrased it about, I'll add in one little segment in the middle. Let's say they realize DeMar Hamlin or Rashad Wildgoose were going to make it at corner or safety, and wow, these guys are really good at being a gunner. That could be the reason Taiwan Jones doesn't make the team, and then that 53rd spot opens up, and Antonio Williams is just too good to release and looks awesome in preseason, and they just can't afford to release him. Maybe then you get a path, but it's because somebody beat him out for that special teams role, not the running back role.
Yeah, but if they cut Jerry Hughes and Cody Ford, then they can.
Don't get me started. Oh God, my mentions were so fun this week. So our last segment is about a player that gets a lot of attention and someone that we haven't really gone into, and I'm just as guilty of kind of playing around with what this could mean, but it's Christian Wade. And Christian Wade is just got married to a lovely gal and has a lot of posts on IG about that, and is obviously a fun athlete. We saw him take his first preseason touch for a touchdown and the second one for a 65-yard screen pass that he didn't score because he didn't know where to run and he ran the wrong way. And I love the story. It's awesome to think about. And the only one that's been a better one is F.A. Obata, who actually is translated out of that International Pathways program into an NFL roster spot and getting sacks in NFL games. I won't say it's zero. I think there is a chance that Christian Wade can earn the kick return spot that we are assuming is Isaiah McKenzie versus Marquez Stevenson. It will be a huge topic next week in our wide receiver show. There is a chance that he wins a role in that return game is the only one I could see. But to start playing NFL football for the first time at age 26 or 27, and to think that you're going to be able to figure out one of the most complex and challenging games at that level without the 15-year, 20-year head start some of these guys have playing at 5 and 6 years old, it's just so much to ask. So it's an awesome story. He's really fun. He's a funny dude. Like, I like having him around the roster and I'm in the locker room. I don't know that I expect him to ever see a regular season snap in any NFL roster.
Yeah, I'll go a step further than you. I think it's a 0% chance he ever plays an active NFL game. And it's nothing against him. I agree with you. I think he's got a great personality. It's a cool story. I like the program that the NFL has.
Yeah. The reason you do it is to find the F.A. Obatas.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's a good story. I think it's great PR for the NFL. Yeah. I think this has worked out really well for the Bills. They've gotten a ton of free publicity and stories out of this. I think he's reached
Bills are probably one of the most popular teams in England.
Yeah, probably. I think he's reached his peak of NFL career already, and that's hanging out on this practice squad. It's nothing against the guy. Like you said, though, when you watch that video that Eric and Anthony broke down the running game, and you're talking about guys Zach Moss and Singletary have been doing this their entire lives, playing running back. And
they're
lives.
Not even spot on.
And there's intricacies in the running game that they're missing, and there's vision things within the running game and setting up blocks that they're missing. It's more than just this guy has athletic ability and you send him out there to run. It was fun to see him score those touchdowns in the preseason, but I do think that this, to me, goes a step further. The people that are pounding the table that Christian Wade is some unlocked star for the NFL, I guess there's always, as you say, a non-zero chance, but I think it's real close to zero. And I think it goes further than like the Duke Williams and the Jake Kumros and the Antonio Williams stands, because this is just such a long shot to ever see this guy play a game, that to stand for that just as a step further, that just, I feel like it's almost, you're just kind of digging your heels into that. You're standing for the guys that you know aren't going to make this team because you love the underdog so much. Sure. It's a thing you do, but nobody can seriously evaluate football and evaluate these rosters that he's been on with the Bills and find any way that he takes time away from anybody else or any opportunities at production.
Yeah, and it's tough to assume they're going to be. And
if he was 24,
sure, yeah,
or
I
something.
Think Jason was just making that point here, that if he had done this and was like a teenage phenom in rugby,
sure,
and 21, 22, 23, and then came over and, like you said, started at 23, and then his development years were 23, 24, 25, and now we're hitting age 26, and they're like, hey, we still have a path forward here.
we
But
could get 4 or 5 years out of this. Yeah.
yeah, it's tough to think that we're gonna get more in that stretch, and that there's also a free way to statue him. He's going to turn 31 later on, and you get to keep him as a free exception, and he gets to be around the team and learn.
How long does
be a
that
good
exception
story.
last?
This is last year.
Last year.
This is last year.
Thanks for your service.
Yeah. I will be very surprised if it goes anywhere beyond that. So it'll be fun to see him in a preseason game. It'll be fun to see him probably get a kick return, a punt return in a preseason game, and have some fun that way. But yeah, I'm expecting that to be
Pretty cool retirement gig though for a rugby player to come over to the States, not have to play football and hang out on a professional team and get paid to be
train
part of
and
that.
Work
like
out and learn.
Hell, man, he did something
honestly,
right. That's
still made pretty good. Like I think
pretty
I
good
saw
gig.
It, if you're on the roster the whole time, off season practices, training camp, and then on the training camp, the whole practice squad, the whole season, I think it's over $100,000 now. I think that it's in the like low 100,000 range. So yeah, you get to just train all the time and work out, and I mean you do have to be a little bit of a practice dummy for NFL players, but it's not a bad gig. So our Uncle Jumbo's player spotlight is a popular one. It's Christian Wade. It's going to be fun to see in the preseason and in the training camp to be able to see where it goes, but he's a distant fifth. It's sixth, probably even. He's probably a lesser running back than Taiwan Jones even. So
real quick,
he's far down the list.
Uncle Jumbo's. I want to shout him out real quick because I saw earlier. The owners posted that their sons and I are recognized for New York State Assembly Hometown Heroes for their role in producing the sanitizers. They're at the lowest possible price. So they turned over their production of vodka in their drinks, and they made the hand sanitizer. My wife's work had a bunch of it. I see it all over the place. I took a picture. I was at Greg's. You pick strawberries. There was a big spray bottle of the hand sanitizer, and they turned their facility into making a ton of hand sanitizer to get out to people when there was a shortage of it. And I was saying to my wife, like it's cool to have sponsors and to keep the podcast going, but it's even cooler when they're really good people, and it's a company that you feel good about being your sponsor. So congratulations to you guys, and thanks for being our sponsors. It's pretty cool to have good people behind us.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome to be able to do that, and the guys over there, the Kostridis family, and everything they've done has been awesome. They've been great partners for us. We're excited to be partnered with them again this year and looking forward to it. So that wraps it up for our running back show for the week, and it's something that, is maybe not the most hotly contested of all the position groups, but I do think those two tiers, who takes the lead role between Singletary and Moss, who makes the roster out of Matt Breida and Antonio Williams, can anyone beat out Taiwan Jones for a special teams role? Those are going to be some of the more fun storylines to watch in training camp, and running backs are a fun one to watch in the preseason games because obviously there's not really a ton to care about with Jake Fromm or Davis Webb, but the second half of the preseason games, watching guys like Antonio Williams and Matt Breida get those touches and those carries where they're fighting for their jobs, that's going to be fun to watch, and something that I think is one of the best takeaways from those preseason games. So that's going to be something I'm going to keep my eye on.
Yeah, you're right. That's fun. This is still, even though, again, we're not expecting the Bills to all of a sudden come out and run a bunch or anything like that. And I don't think either Moss or Singletary is going to break out to be a top NFL productive running back. But this room really intrigues me, and this position group really intrigues me, because I do think if they can get some more consistent production out of the run game and make it more of a threat, that it really, the analytics crowd's going to kill me, that it opens up things. But I think more balance on this offense when you play teams like Kansas City, when you play teams like Tennessee and Baltimore, and some of these teams that are going to be tough to get over those humps, the more balance you have and the more threat that you have to be able to be productive on the ground is only going to help Josh Allen and take some of the pressure off of the passing game and allow them to really flourish more. So I'm excited to see the Bills are at the point where they're hitting up close to a ceiling league-wide of being in that top 5 teams, I believe. And so if you can inch out any production across any of your groups, I don't know how much more productive Stephon Diggs can be. I don't know how much more Emmanuel Sanders is going to bring than John Brown brought. Like how much production can you squeeze out? But you look at the running back room, and I see probably the biggest potential to squeeze out some more production for this team. There's more opportunity to invest into this room to get some production that you weren't getting last year. So that's where I'm most excited about this room, because there's a lot of unknown. We don't know who's going to be getting the majority of the carries, what the scheme's even going to look like. We have guesses. We're not sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of intrigue here, because I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of the rest of this offense and the rest of this team. But the running back, there's a lot of unknown, man.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, and I think that there's a lot of fun things to watch, and we're going to be right there with you. We're going to be going through the rest of our positional previews. We're going to go through the wide receivers, tight ends, quarterback specialists, everyone like that the next couple weeks. Then we're going to get into some of the training camp storylines, what we're seeing in the reporting from training camp. If we're able to go over and take a look at some of the practices that are open to the public, we'll give you our insight on what we see. The idea that we're going to go through is to be able to be right there with you each week leading all the way up to the first game, and then we'll get back into our preview and post-game series. But we're going to be there for you the whole time. So, Aaron, where can the good people find you?
You can find me at Aaron Quinn 716, and every Wednesday night here with you, my man.
That's right. You can find me at Greg Thompson, here with Aaron on Cover One Buffalo, having some fun with the new Cover One draft show, and all over on Twitter and in the Cover One Slack channel. Come on over, have a lot of fun, check it out. Check out our sponsors at Underdog. Download their app, use the promo code Cover One, get yourself $25 free to play around. We're gonna have a lot of fun with it this year. But thank you for checking this out. I am Greg Thompson. You've been listening to Aaron Quinn. We are Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.